look at today really is I'm going to do a little bit of a session to start us off this morning. We're going to look at the syllabus and the resources to support exam preparation. I've got a 6-stage process that I'd like to take you through that will help you in getting ready for your exams or indeed preparing for any assessments that you may have. We'll also look at some study techniques to support success as well. These are tried and tested through many thousands of CIPS students and indeed many students in other walks of academic life as well. So we'll put a procurement focus on those. Then I'm going to invite Kirsty to come and talk to us about the exams, to give us some background on what we assess and why we do it, and the importance of assessments in the procurement and supply professional exams. Kirsty's also going to spend some time thinking about the exam command words, and these are so important in trying to direct your thinking of how to respond in the best way possible to your exam questions. Then Kirsty's going to tell us a little bit about some things to think about, what to look out for in the exam. And then she's going to hand back to me, and then we'll do a wrap up, thinking about how we get ourselves organised for the exam day itself. And then we're open to you to answer any questions that you have. Just to iterate one more time, if you have a question through this webinar, please pop it in the Q&A box. That means that colleagues behind the scenes at CIPS will be able to respond to your questions really quickly, and any questions that they feel would be really useful for everybody to hear, I will then be dealing with at the end of this session alongside with Kirsty. So please do use the Q&A box. Okay, so let's move on now and let's think about getting ready for exams. Well, the first thing we need to think about is that we're thinking here about level 4, which is our biggest, by far, the exam series that's always the biggest is the level 4. And I just want us to take a step back and think about the CIPS procurement cycle and how this relates to our exam modules. So what I've done here is on the left-hand side, I have taken from the CIPS website our 13-stage CIPS procurement cycle. And hopefully you're really familiar with this, given that we're starting to do revision at this point. If you're not, and this is new to you, then this is free to download. Now, colleagues are behind the scenes providing links for lots of different downloads during the course of this webinar. We've got a little bit of maintenance on the website just occurring at this moment. So whilst those download links may not work immediately, please hang on to them, because in an hour or so's time, those links will work perfectly well. Getting back to the CIPS procurement cycle and how these work through with the level 4 modules, I've created a little grid here on the right-hand side. Across the top here, I've identified the cycle stages 1 through 13. And down the side, I have identified our CIPS level 4 modules 1 through 8. And what I've done here is I have highlighted for you where the content is related to each stage of the procurement cycle and where you'll find them in each one of our CIPS level 4 modules. And I've done this really to help or guide you, provide you with a map that really helps you understand where you can find different sorts of materials. So as you can see, modules 1 and 8 deal with the whole procurement cycle from beginning to end. They do this in 2 quite distinct ways. 1 is very much about the knowledge, and 8 is very much more about the application. Modules 2 to 7 carry a variety of different topic areas, and I think a really nice illustration here is L4M7, when we're really looking at stages 10, which is warehousing and logistics, and 13, around asset management. So you'll be able to see really clearly which stages of the procurement cycle are covered in which of the CIPS Level 4 study modules. So hopefully that's a useful slide to help orientate yourselves through the CIPS syllabus. Okay, now exams aren't that far away. We're talking about May and we are now early April. So we need to start thinking about how do we get ourselves organised to make best use of the time we have left in preparing for our exam. So what I've created is a counting down to exams clock, really. And you can see this just emerging on the left-hand side. And this step-by-step guide is designed really to take you through getting organised, starting with thinking about the syllabus, then working out what time you have left. So I recognise that you're at work. I recognise you've got lots of other things to do. It's trying to find the time and identify the time that you have. Then there's a piece of work about identifying the things that you don't know. And it's really important to focus on the areas where you don't have very much knowledge rather than revising areas where you've got really strong knowledge. This way, you'll be using your time in the most effective way. There is no substitute for reading and making notes and doing revision in the longhand form of things. This is the way that you create the neural pathways to help you remember this content in the exam. And stage 5 is really to summarize what you have been reading and creating mind maps and other revision resources to really secure that knowledge in your mind. Finally, setting yourself questions that are really going to challenge your thinking is the final step in your exam preparation process. And in this way, what you do is you're able to use the knowledge that you have in lots of different formats. And that again secures your understanding in a much firmer way. But let's, over the next couple of minutes, work through each one of those stages. So the first thing to do is, at this point, if you don't have a copy of the syllabus that you are going to be examined on, or the syllabus that you're working through, you may not be being examined on it in May, but you may be in July. If you don't have a copy of the syllabus, then the first thing to do is to download a copy from the CIPS website. It is freely available, and you can download it really easily. So it's really important that every one of our learners downloads a copy of the syllabus and takes time to read the syllabuses that you are focused on studying. So when you come to look at our syllabus, you will see a page very similar to this. This is taken from level 4, but the syllabus format looks very similar in all of our levels. But you just see this line of these bits of information. So let me help you identify the bits that you need to be thinking about. Right. The first thing is LO. This is a short for something called the learning outcome. And here it is identified as 1.0. Understand how to devise a business case for requirements to be sourced from external suppliers. That is the learning outcome associated with the content that sits beneath that. It's a focus for your learning, and it identifies a body of knowledge that you need to get to grips with. So the learning outcomes, if you think about them in relation to L4M1 and in L4M8 in the level 4 syllabus, these learning outcomes are really important because they are linked to the exam questions that you're given. So in L4M1, where you have 4 exam questions, exam question 1 is actually related to learning outcome 1 in the syllabus. Question 2 is linked to learning outcome 2 in the syllabus, and so on. So certainly for each one of your modules, you need to be thinking about where what the learning outcome is, because you are going to be assessed on the totality of the information that sits beneath that. The next thing to think about is the AC. This is short for assessment criteria. And that in our syllabus is denoted by the 0.1. So we've got here 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and so on. 1.1, analyze how business needs influence procurement decisions, is the assessment criteria. And this is the information, the statement that our examiners will be looking at when they are thinking about examining the indicative content below. So it's always important to think about the assessment criteria in relation to the indicative content. Now, the indicative content is identified by the bullet points that I've highlighted here on the right-hand side. So we've got here in 2.3, that's your assessment criteria, we have indicative content, and there is the blob here, collate sources of information to estimate the breakdown of costs between direct and indirect costs for purchased goods and services. That's a very long bit of indicative content, but that's effectively one element of indicative content. And what you need to do as the learners is to make sure that you are going through all of the assessment criteria and the associated indicative content when you're preparing for your exams. It's really important to read through the entire syllabus to make sure that you understand the full sweep of the syllabus, and to make sure that you have you've turned the page and you don't end up with the surprise that there's an extra learning outcome that you weren't expecting to see. So make sure you take the time to look at the syllabus in detail before you start off. So the next thing to think about is working out how much time you've got left. And we are all time poor. Many of you are working, many of you have got other commitments as well. And so sometimes fitting study in can be quite a challenge. And what this little grid is really designed to help you with is to plan in a very consistent way your preparation for your exams. Now, I'm using a 9-day rundown to your exam. However, I would be expecting yours to be a number of weeks longer than this, so much more detailed and much more spread out. But for the purposes of illustration, what I've identified here at the top is I've got the exam day here on the far right, and then the day before the exam is identified as -1, the day before that -2, and so on. So really I'm looking at kind of 9 days out before my exam. What I then have done is I've looked at my calendar and my diary, and I've worked out how many hours I have in each one of those days to devote to my studies. And I've identified here on day -9, I've got 2 hours, and I've got 2 hours really all the way to day -4, where I've identified I've got 4 hours. Perhaps this is a weekend, perhaps this is where I've got a bit of time off from work or what have you. So I've identified the number of quality study hours that I'm going to be able to allocate in each day. And it's really important to be realistic when you've got lots of other pressures, lots of other things to do as well. But in this example, I've identified that I've got 2 hours spare on most of the days I've got. And what I'm then doing is I'm saying, okay, well, I've got a total of 20 odd hours to spend across my 4 learning outcomes for L4, M4. I now need to make sure that I'm allocating an equal amount of time for each one of my learning outcomes revision. So, for example, I'm allocating 5 hours to learning outcome 1, 2 hours on day -9, 2 hours on day -8, and 1 hour on day -7. When I flip over, using my second hour to start my revision of learning outcome 2, and so it goes on. Then I have 4 hours on day -4, and I'm going to be reviewing learning outcome 3 on that day. And then in learning outcome, in day -3 and -2, I'm looking at learning outcome 4. This is a way of making sure that you focus equally on each one of the learning outcomes, because each one of those learning outcomes will be examined to the same detail. So it's really important that you don't put all of your efforts in the first 2 learning outcomes and forget learning outcome 3 and 4, because you'll be really doing yourselves out of an opportunity to show how much knowledge you have in those areas. So it is really important to allocate a good amount of time and an equal amount of time across each one of the learning outcomes. So hopefully I've convinced you to make a plan that does include learning outcome 3 and learning outcome 4. So the third stage in the step-by-step process that I recommend in preparing for exams is then to work out what you don't know. And all of us have different levels of knowledge for different sorts of content. It might be that you've had experience in other courses or at work for different parts of the CIPS syllabus, and that's absolutely fine. And that's why it's so important for you to do a personalized assessment of your own knowledge. And all it is, it's really very simple. What you do is you grab hold of the syllabus and you look at each one of the areas of indicative content. I've put mine on a spreadsheet because it just helps with the kind of sorting out of the materials later, but you can put it on a spreadsheet. And then what you can do is you can score each part of the indicative content on a score. I've created a little score here of 0, where I really haven't got very much knowledge at all, 1 where I've just got a little bit of knowledge, and 2 where I've got quite good levels of confidence. You can identify or create a score system that works for you. But really, for illustration purposes, what this is trying to show is that where you score your content understanding quite low, this is really where you need to focus your attention most of all. It's so tempting to start your revision by opening the book, the study guide, or your textbook on the front page and starting to read from there. And actually, we notice that that we have really good performance for learning outcome 1 typically, but it really does fall off as we move through the syllabus. This way gives you the opportunity to focus your very busy time in areas where you've got least understanding, and therefore the greatest chance of making improvements. So it's a very systematic way of doing your revision. So what you do is, once you've scored the whole syllabus that you're going to be assessed on, then what you do is you group up all the areas where you need to spend, you don't know that much information, so all the 0s in this case, and prioritize those number 1. That's where you start your revision, and you work through each one of those areas of indicative content meticulously and thoroughly before you then move on to those areas where you've got some knowledge. So this is the yellow section here, the process of management, where in this example, that would be the next area that I would be focusing on once I had secured my understanding of organizational metaphors. In this way, you focus on the areas where you know least, and therefore you can use your time in the most effective way. Okay, so once we've identified the areas where we really do need to place our focus, then, as I said earlier, there is really no substitute for reading and making notes. So use the CIPS study guides, use the CIPS Intelligence Hub, use SM, use the variety of textbooks that are available, use the internet, do your research, read widely, and make notes. There is no substitute for your own notes. Whilst it's really tempting to borrow somebody else's notes for a particular topic, you have unique experiences, and your notes fit you and suit you best of all. So there really is no substitute for doing the hard work yourself and creating the notes that work for you. And that's why it's so important to think carefully about how you're going to use your time, because making notes is a time-consuming process, and therefore it's important to focus down on those areas where you need to really focus that effort. What we also notice is that you acquire most knowledge where you engage with the resources. So where we notice that where students use the CIPS Intelligence Hub, where they engage with undertaking questions for themselves, writing notes, asking each other questions, all of those sorts of activities, we notice that their knowledge acquisition and their security of and confidence in that knowledge is so much greater than students that don't engage with those resources. So I do urge you to take the time, get familiar with all of the different resources, pardon me, that CIPS offer. And I know colleagues behind the scenes will be offering you links to different sorts of resources. Those links will work in about an hour's time, so just be patient if they're not working for you just at this moment. But really engage with them, and you will find that your acquisition of knowledge and your understanding of these principles will come a lot more easily to you. So moving now on to stage 5. This is all about the making of connections. So we know that procurement and supply topics are very interrelated and typically quite complicated and complex. That's why we've broken the level 4 syllabus down into 8 modules, and why we've broken syllabuses 2, 3, 4, etc. into different areas, because our profession is complicated and it's very interlinked. What's really important is once you've made your notes and once you've done your research, it's about making connections, trying to bring concepts and ideas together and think about the impact that those issues may have. Maybe that when you're thinking about perhaps issues around tendering, what's the impact on time? What's the impact on quality? How do your stakeholders feel about these things? And making those connections is a really important way of securing your knowledge. Linking ideas together, and if you do this during your revision, you'll find, pardon me, you'll find that in your exams, these principles and concepts work much more, they will come to mind much more easily if you've spent the time making those links and adding those thoughts together. So always think about, the 5 rights of procurement. How do they interrelate? How do they work together? How do our stakeholders work? Are all of their wants and needs always possible to realize, or is there some trade-offs that are necessary? Think about the implications of those sorts of compromises that may need to be made. There are lots of different ways for you to think about doing this. You can create your own mind maps. You might be able to create lists. You might be able to draw diagrams, whatever works for you. But certainly creating these links is a very important part of your preparation. So finally, the real acid test is checking your knowledge by asking questions. So the purpose of the exam that Kirsty will come and talk to us about in a moment really is for you to show off everything that you know. And to make sure that you're ready for those exams is to ask yourself really difficult questions. And here's the thing, actually, you are your best judge of a difficult question. The best learning occurs when you ask yourself the hardest possible question. So you're really having to think things through really carefully in order to make connections. And even if your question is so hard that you can't make all of the connections, and you may need to go back to look at your notes or review a textbook or the study guide just to make those final connections, that whole process of answering that really difficult question and making those connections, that whole process secures that knowledge in your mind and will make you the best you can possibly be in terms of readiness for the exams. So I urge you to take time to think about and create questions that work for you and are challenging for you. As a starter, however, we have sample questions on the CIPS website, and links will be sent out to you with regard to where you can find those. But really, that's just a starter. Really good revision, really good exam preparation takes those questions and then moves them on to so that they are personalized to you. My last kind of thing around questions is it can be a really kind of social activity as well. So get friends and family involved in asking you questions. You've written them, but get somebody else to ask them too. Sometimes it can really help to explain some of our procurement principles and some of our ideas to people that know nothing about our profession. In this way, we are able then to articulate really clearly the things that matter in a way that is really easy to understand, and that's really what the examiners are looking for. So that's really our 6-stage preparation for your exams, and I hope that's been helpful in making you think about actually all the power is with you. The syllabuses are freely available, and it's just a question of getting stuck in and you know, using the CIPS resources such to help you, but also reading more widely as well. Now, I know you're really keen to catch up with Kirsty, who's going to talk to us about the exams. So Kirsty, I'd like to welcome